good afternoon, there's good evening, right? So we kind of want to start on time. I hope you enjoyed that video. You can find that video on YouTube. It's go under National Geographic and you can say, "Are sneakers sustainable?" And you'll find that video. It's a very compelling video. I think was done a couple years back, and it just focused on what, it was really about sneakers, but obviously all shoes play a part. So we're just going to get started here. I'm your host of this session. Thank you and welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. There were a plethora of sessions that went on focusing on Catalyst 2030 and focusing on how we're achieving the SDGs for 2030. And this is our session. We are part of the fashion group, but we have created a sub-pillar called the waste stream. And our session is entitled Shoe Waste and the Future of Footwear and Fashion, because we cannot have solution for footwear without it being part of fashion. So I am your host and moderator, Tanita Gray. I am the editor and founder of LastReport.com. It is a footwear magazine. And I am also newly the CEO of Shoe Waste here in Los Angeles. It's a pilot program that we're putting together for a permanent space. Hopefully we should be launching for 2023. And I am the lead for the Catalyst 2030 Waste Stream group. And I am here with some amazing guests, including some of my co-members of the Waste Stream and Catalyst 2030. And we're really excited to talk about this because shoe waste is something that, it's been around for a long, long time. And it's kind of been, not in the forefront of thinking when we think about recycling, sustainability, and what our plans are. So this session is we're going to be doing here is discovering some strategic, we want to have some strategic conversations about our future outcomes for waste and the fashion waste management system overall. We'll come up with some or think about and discuss some ways that we can collaborate together. We are all representing some amazing organizations. We cannot do any of these things alone. So this session is also to kind of help throw in, who we could collaborate with, and including the audience and the guests. And I'd like for everyone to walk away with some sort of opportunities to leverage our network and our ideas to formulate a plan that we can all move forward with and take action. And some of us are already taking those actions. We have, like I said, we have some amazing guests that represent these fantastic organizations here. And so I will let them go ahead and get started with introducing themselves. But first, we're going to put a poll in the chat. And it's a very simple question. I get asked this question a lot now recently with shoe waste. And I get people emailing me and asking me, what can they do with their shoes? So I want to know from you guys, and we all kind of want to know, how do you discard your shoes? What do you do with them? Just doesn't have to come up with anything fantastical, just real simple, what you do now with shoes that you can no longer use. If you can throw that answer into the chat, that would be great. And then we'll just kind of take a look at those answers throughout our conversation today. So what do you do with your shoes once you can no longer use them? Okay. So we're going to get to know our experts and our guests, and I'm really excited to introduce them. Actually, I'm going to introduce them first, and then you guys could go down the list and introduce yourselves. I don't want to have any interruption with name pronunciations because people still call me Tanisha, even though my name is Tanita. So even if they see it written, it comes out a different way. So I'm going to let Liz take over and start with her introduction.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be with you guys. I'm connecting today from the Netherlands, but I'm actually originally from Colombia. And I'm an Ashoka Fellow, and I started an organization in Canada in 2011 that dealt with the intersection of sustainable production and sustainable consumption. So that means that we kind of worked with both producers and consumers of sustainable fashion, and that was important because it was important for us to look at like to really arrive to some systemic change. You really need to work with all the different partners and the different stakeholders of the value chain. So we believe that it was important to work with producers. And when we say with producer, it was mainly um, um, designers, entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, but also bigger businesses, and also obviously with the consumption side as well. Um, Now, currently, I am in the Netherlands. I'm doing a doctoral research in circular economy and social impact. So I'm kind of specializing in like the I believe the circular economy is really an approach that can give us a more systemic view and really the solutions for the system for the apparel value chain and the shoe value chain, the tools to see things from a holistic perspective. And what I specialize is really looking at circularity not only from an environmental point of view, but also as a tool for arriving for sustainable development through environmental and social elements as well. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now, and I'm happy to be with you guys today. And I will say, Tanita asked us to think about what kind of SDGs are we working around, and I think through this particular project, we're dealing with specifically the partnerships, because from a research perspective we're really working on creating those synergies between the different actors. But because the angle of where I'm looking at things is really the social impact and gender equality, I believe we're also working in the SDG 12, which is like sustainable consumption and production, but also SDG 4 and 5, which is about gender equality. And then because we're obviously working with circular economy, anything that is related to SDG 13, which is the climate change, it's also part of what we are following through. So happy to be with you guys today, and looking forward for an exciting conversation.
Thank you, Liz.
Hello, everyone. It's Gautam here from India. I represent an organization that goes by the name Meaningful Design Foundation. We were introduced to Catalyst 2030 ecosystem through the conduit of one of our product verticals, Jaggery, that works in the waste to value space. We are a women-led organization connecting design dots to positive impact. We work exclusively with other social enterprises and social impact organizations from around the world. We think of ourselves as a loci that brings about positive disruption, almost like a lab that launches goal-driven initiatives to make the world a better place by accelerating the SDGs. And that all sounds really heavy, but how do we make this happen? So we take a praxis-based approach, which essentially is guided by theory and inaction by practice. So we combine design thinking with cross-disciplinary research, industry insights to diagnose problems, and then design solutions design solutions in an iterative and reflective manner. So our product matrix is Jaggery, which I touched upon earlier. Then there is an ecosystem building component to our organization matrix. It's called the Great Reset. So around the time of the COVID issue, when it first made its presence felt, the United Nations launched something called the Great Reset. So playing off of that, what we are all aspiring to do is get to a new state of a new revolutionary state, right? You could call it the Great Revolution. So for us to achieve the great revolution, we're not just going to be able to walk right into it. We want to pause and then make the great reset. So this great reset essentially brings together people who have never had the opportunity to discuss ideas sitting across the screen, from, let's say, creative practitioners, being merged with upcyclers around the world, filmmakers being introduced to textile waste manufacturers from around the world, and similar dots being connected, which were earlier impossible to connect. And the last piece of our matrix is the consultancy and media production arm, which is called Earth Fighting For. And with this, essentially we want to promote positive messages about sustainability, that people can inculcate in their daily lives and bring about small but measurable changes that can all add up, to a larger sum. So one of the reasons why, when Tanita and I were talking about this idea of, when she sort of introduced this idea of shoe waste, I jumped at it because I've been a lifelong sneakerhead. I have my first sneaker that I picked up when my shoe size froze, and so I still have that. And when my first kid was born, I made sure that I got her a nice pair of sneakers. And so it kind of runs in the DNA. And there are a few solutions that I've been thinking about in my own silos. And this kind of this conversation, the strategic conversation, gives us all an opportunity to put our point across to people who can really make things happen. So with that, it's back to you, Tanita.
Thank you. I think we can all relate to being a sneakerhead at some point in our lives.
Right.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Bakoda Jagloke. I'm a brand and business consultant. My company is the Global Fashion Marketplace, and my focus is really sustainability and innovation. So I do this in a number of different ways. So I focus on consulting. I've written a book called The 10 Crucial Steps to Getting Started with Sustainable Fashion. So it's for fashion businesses and entrepreneurs to really get on that path to sustainability and understand. I'm also the host of the Sustainable Fashion podcast. So I host a lot of conversations about sustainability, really trying to unravel the kind of worms that it is for businesses to understand the routes that they need to follow to become more sustainable. I've got about 15 years experience in entrepreneurship, so working on business development with entrepreneurs globally, with a wide range of businesses from startups to independent brands. The focus of the Global Fashion Marketplace is really business development. So it's helping fashion businesses reach markets, but our mission, reach new international markets, but our mission is to empower ethical businesses to compete. So it is business and brand development that we focus on, but we only focus on working with sustainable businesses or businesses that want to get on that path to sustainability. So it's all about helping people build in people, companies build in people, planet and profit as a foundation to their structure of their business, and making that all align for a more sustainable future. And we've partnered with the goal number 12. So our main goal out of the Sustainable Development Goals is responsible consumption and production by 2030. So that's what we're working towards, helping businesses produce more sustainably and helping consumers understand how to choose the right product. So this conversation is really interesting because I understand that the consumer doesn't know what to do with their shoes, along with a lot of other fashion items. But as with textiles, there is a little bit of recycling taking place, but it's very much a kind of worms. But with shoes, it's another anomaly that needs to be tackled. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. So what we've done at the Global Fashion Marketplace is developed an accelerator program. So it's for fashion startups and independent businesses. And it's just building it's a 12-week program to help build the foundations of sustainability into their business model and prepare for funding and growth. So that's really what I've been working on. I know I've got I've got some notes here. I'll find out with Tanita if she wants me to go into the points, because she asked me to talk a little bit about the SDGs SDGs and how we might be able to reach that goal. And I have a bit of a context that of train of thought that I wanted to share. So I'm not really sure. Tini, is this the time to go into that, or shall I wait until another part of the conversation is just the introduction?
Yeah, you can go right into that, Paula. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So my train of thought really is that in order to reimagine the future of fashion and footwear in regards to waste management, we need to have an African-centered conversation. And that conversation would help achieve all of the sustainable development goals by 2030, or a lot of them. So I just wanted to break down a few facts and figures to do with fashion waste and the African context. So we can really understand, I think some of you might be aware, but just to understand where our waste is going and how that is impacting the future in terms of sustainability. So according to the World Economic Forum, fashion and textiles is a 1.3 trillion market, and it employs 300 million people globally in the value chain. In fashion and textiles in Africa, and the footwear market is estimated 31 billion, employing mainly women and young people. The sector contributes to about 20% of all water waste, and it emits about 10% of the global CO2. By 2050, the fashion industry is going to be using a quarter of the world's carbon budget. So the impact of fast fashion has actually led to like an influx of secondhand clothing into the African market. And I just feel that if we don't tackle that issue of secondhand clothing, where does it go, when does it end up, and have a system that deals with that, then we're not really tackling the fashion issue of waste if we don't look at the context of Africa. So there's, some of you might be aware, there's a lot of secondhand markets in Africa, and there's one really famous one called Kantamontu Market in Ghana's capital, West Africa. I can put some of this information into the chat so you guys can look into this. But this is actually becoming a hub for the Western world's secondhand clothing in Africa. So it seems that Africa is becoming more of a dumping ground, and there is an opportunity if Africa gets to understand how to deal with this waste. And this, for me, building an infrastructure and circular economy African focus will help the world deal with the waste situation. So yeah, so that's really my thoughts. And in regards to the SDGs, how can developing African-centered circular fashion industry support the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? So if we're looking at goal number 1 and goal number 2, that's no poverty and zero hunger. So looking at building a circular fashion industry would help with the creation of new industries, waste management, and new production innovation, African focus, because that's where the waste is ending up. So I think that would be tackling goal number 1 and 2. Good health and well-being, better sanitation and stable livelihoods would be another result of focusing on developing these industries in Africa, specifically related to waste management and sorting out waste and kind of dealing with a proper system for dealing with what comes into the country and then repurposing that for the market. There's actually a case study as well that I'll probably mention a little bit later. There's actually a really cool brand in Uganda that's doing just that. So they're basically, let me just get the name of it so you guys can look it up if you want to. They are called Return to Sender, so it's a Ugandan brand, and they're basically,
yeah, we definitely are mentioning them or in the other segments, but that's perfect. Like you're even thinking, like we're thinking about the same things, because it's yeah, it's new, it's fresh, and it just dropped, I think, recent in last month, right, or something like that. So yeah, we will definitely touch on them.
Yeah, so they're just a good example of they're using the waste from the secondhand market. They're creating upcycling products and then they're sending them back to Europe and America to be sold as new products. So it's just an example of how this can create jobs and create opportunities and deal with some of those sustainable development goals. Even looking further into some of the goals, gender equality as well, as I mentioned, and quality education. Those things are really important with upskilling. As I mentioned, the women and children are a huge part of the fashion industry, people that work in the fashion industry, and giving them jobs and kind of opportunities within the circular economy would help with those goals. Also, clean water, sanitation, affordable energy, decent work and economic growth, goals 6, 7 and 8. These can be solved. Solving the issue of fashion waste is a combination of sustainability, sanitation, resource management. So building circular industries in Africa will result in decent working conditions and economic growth as well. And for me, this would be a template that could be used in different parts of the world as well. I'm just focusing on that because there's such a high saturation of waste that needs to be managed going into the continent. And then goal 9, industry innovation and infrastructure, again, focusing on circular economy, building the infrastructure to support the circular business models would definitely solve goal number 9. Goal number 10, reduce inequality, more jobs and strong industry would reduce inequalities across the continent. And then we've got goal number 11 and 12, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption reduction. If building a circular economy is the focus of Africa, then those sustainable cities and communities will be at the heart of the work that they do, and the opportunities and innovation can come from there. And yeah, so that's really it. And then obviously there's goals 13 to 15, climate action, life below water and land. The knock-on effect is definitely there, handling the waste and pollution situation from the elements from extraction of materials to recycling. And I think that's really important. And I think I've got a couple more points. Let's see where I am.
We can definitely tell it's a lot, right? There's a lot of crossover that we could be doing, and there's a lot. And I don't want you to use all of your energy, because there's some of those things that you're pointing out, we definitely have room to discuss that. But I've absolutely, like, dealing with waste, whether through fashion or whether through food or any of those things, definitely addresses all 17 of those SDGs in major ways, maybe some more than others, but you're definitely tackling number 1 through 10 just fine, and then the rest, like you said, just like the domino effect. So, but that's really perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure there's lots more that we will tap into as we go along, but let me get so thank you very much, Bukola, for that fantastic intro and shedding light on things that this is about things that we think about, but not really, it's not on the forefront. So this session is to extract some of those thought processes and put it in the forefront. So we may be thinking, oh, where does the waste end up in the world? And like, oh yeah, we know it ends up here, we ends up there, but it's not the first thing we're thinking about, right? So we kind of have to think outside of the box to come up with these solutions and strategies. So I'm gonna let Andy go ahead and introduce himself. He represents a great organization in the footwear industry, and I'm not gonna tell it, I'm gonna let him talk about it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the passion from the other presenters and the passion from people who are joining to talk about these issues. I think the debate today is very different than the debate from 2 years ago when we started to discuss recycling footwear en masse, both in terms of consumers globally, but also in terms of brands and the responsibility they're starting to see that they need to work on these issues. So I work for FDRA. We're the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. It means that we support nearly every major shoe company globally, not just in the US. We have a lot of shoe companies in Africa, in Europe, and in Asia, and beyond, and South America. And our job as a nonprofit organization is to strengthen the industry and help provide tools, resources, and data to help them optimize operations. We focus heavily on collaboration, so bringing brands together and companies together so that they can talk to each other. Oftentimes we see within companies, they see problems linearly in their own supply chains instead of realizing they're part of a larger community and group. And then as we help people get around the table and discuss these issues, they start to see how non-competitive collaboration can help solve a lot of challenges. And through our sustainability program, we've seen that by collaborating across brands and suppliers and even consumers, we can increase the impact and increase the work and decrease the costs of going alone. And that's really what we've been focused around in our program. Our program is really interesting because a lot of what we're doing over the past several years is merely research and socialization. So it's a lot of trying to define what sustainability is, what circularity is. I think it's still a large concept, and people and brands are still trying to get their head around. And footwear in particular is very different than apparel because of the makeup of footwear. You can have 70 materials and inputs coming from 5 to 12 countries. And the complexity of the different material types and certifications you need and the compliance and all that is really difficult to manage. So where we've been trying to figure out capacity for recycling. We've been trying to figure out durability standards so that we can keep footwear on people's feet longer instead of going into landfills, and how we do that and what we look at. We've been focused at the factory level for post-industrial waste. So that's one of the big areas we work on. Is we have a shoe factory waste program that goes in and trains a factory to identify waste streams and keep them out of landfills. And that's in China and Vietnam. We've seen a huge reduction, over 70% reduction in waste going into landfills in these countries. And they're either recycling it with local service providers who can take that and put it in other products, or figuring out how to put, foam or any other kind of waste in the process back into the factory process and stream. So we're doing that at an industrial level, both for footwear and apparel in China and Vietnam, and that will continue to spread, because I would say right now it's in year 3, and we're still figuring out new learnings that we can take. And I think eventually the idea is to build a game plan that any factory globally making footwear and apparel will be able to use in order to, get to zero waste at the factory level, which is extremely important. We also work in the post-consumer space, where we're trying to talk to brands about challenges around take-back programs and new business models that are being created through not just donating shoes that might end up in Africa, as we heard, but really focusing on either taking shoes that are just slightly worn that you can touch up and refurbish and resell, or looking at damaged shoes that actually can't get any more use out of and what you do with them. And footwear is really complicated in that space because, again, of the material makeup and the construction. So we've been focused a lot on researching that, trying to find the infrastructure, trying to look at machines and look at supply chains, because it's almost like a reverse supply chain back from the consumer. And it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of effort to educate consumers not to just simply discard their footwear or their products. But it's almost, when we're talking to brands, it's almost like a change in how they approach consumerism and their relationship with customers. Instead of calling them a customer, it's almost like they have to call them a partner and change how they interact with the consumer in order to get the product back accurately, and then figure out what they do with it. So there's a multitude of issues, but I would say 2 years ago when we started to look at this, we had a lot of brands who were interested but were concerned about putting investment in or effort in because it was so new. And now we have a lot of companies who may have been hesitant to set up chain of custody and reverse supply chains and are now actually fully engaged and looking for solutions and ways to do that. And there's a lot more infrastructure. The challenge is that it is very fragmented. So we're trying to put together best practices and have conversations where other people can find ways forward. But for footwear, it's still very fragmented. It's still very hard for recycling. And I think there's a lot more work to do around the research and the development of infrastructure for recycling. And that's even before circularity. I mean, in the US, we have a huge problem because we import about 2.5 billion pairs of shoes every single year. And just beyond the consumption of footwear in the US, it really is the fact that we don't have domestic production here to get to a fully circular model where we could take back, recycle, grind it down, and put it back into footwear. So you saw on the video, the intro video is always very fascinating. You know, their Adidas, you know, loop where they're doing that. We see these programs pop up and go through, and then there's, you know, it's a lot of buzz around it, and then it just doesn't sustain itself. And I think we've got to figure out how we build these systems where it's a mono-material or the machines and all that to where we can make it work. But it is multifaceted. So we work on all these things of researching and pulling people together and focusing around that. And I'm sure we can get more of that later, but also around the materials too, because we figured around, you know, the goal is to reduce impact on the earth. And how do we do that best? Well, some materials may be able to be recycled and reused. And footwear is a particular product that has to perform. I mean, you step on a pair of shoes, they've got to bounce back and they've got to last. But some material types aren't conducive right now to do that. So we either develop new materials that are, or we need to develop bio-based materials that, you know, if you are recycling a pair of shoes, you can strip off, put it into a compost heap and have a positive gain instead of a negative gain in the landfill. So we're also considering not just this monolithic idea of just grinding up a pair of shoes and trying to put it somewhere else, but really thoughtfully thinking about the different components of shoes and how we build new models and new pathways forward to reduce impact.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. Like, and I can see even as you're talking, like, it's a little bit of frustration because it's an issue that we have to come up with. And, you know, this is Catalyst 2030, and we have, you know, there's some sort of clock, right? And we're also aware of what goes into the making of shoes. It's not like this dress I'm wearing or the t-shirt you're wearing or anyone with button-ups. It's a little bit more easier to handle. Footwear is a very, like you said, much more of a complex situation. But of course, we will be touching on some of these other things as we roll forward. I'm going to have the next final guest introduce himself. Mr. Chandru, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good evening, Tanita, from a very chilly Pretoria, South Africa. It's a real pleasure to be part of this panel. Really looking forward to the discussion. I'm a bit overwhelmed, I think, with all the passion that's come before. So I'm feeling I'm going to keep most of my contributions for later on. But a little bit about who we are. We've been recycling plastic bottles in South Africa for the last 20 odd years. We're also involved in the textile space. So really getting a sense of what it means to tackle solid waste problems from an African context. And I think a lot of my contributions on panels and forums where they'll let me is that reminder that sustainability comes with a big hint of affordability. And when you live in parts of the world where housing, schooling, healthcare, and education are already challenged, it becomes incredibly difficult to motivate people to be environmentally conscious, not just in words, but in actions as well. One thing we did stumble upon over 10 years ago was that if we couldn't change behavior, whether it was for packaging or for clothing or for footwear, or for any product for that matter, then could we perhaps look at influencing policy whereby we could look at things like mandatory EPR, which is extended producer responsibility, and what looked like a real far-fetched hope 10 years ago materialized into legislation November last year in South Africa, where they passed laws on EPR for paper and packaging, lighting and light fittings, and the big one was electrical and electronic goods. And in a nutshell, what it did, it redefined the polluter, not as the consumer who is purchasing the products, but the producer and the brand owner of the product. And what they did is they inflicted potential penalties which are not only financial, but they criminalize non-compliance. So in my 20 years in this business, I've never seen a move to action where talk now remains very cheap, but actually we're starting to see companies taking steps to be mindful about their products at end of life. And I think, you know, for many producers, the sad reality is we never look at a product from its end of life standpoint. It's only about production costs, distribution costs, retail costs, and then making a profit on it. We forget that we induce a loss to the environment when we neglect what's going to happen to a product at its end of life. So on that, a big push for us as well has been on design for circularity, design for recycling, because many a time there are far too many products on our shelves which are quite frankly just designed to fail. You know, I can give you a good idea of products where just because of one flaw, because marketing needs it to be shiny and pretty and appeal to the consumer, what they've done is they've condemned it to the landfill and the oceans. So I'm a big proponent of policy interventions where brand owners are held accountable for their products at end of life. The reality is that brand owners equally have the resources to be able to tackle a lot of these problems. The notion that we're going to educate consumers to do the right thing, I think, is something we don't have time to enact. Sure, it's a critical part of the whole topic around sustainability, but the climate change issue, I think, is trumping a lot of these approaches where we have to be mindful that we just don't have time. And I think just in closing for this part of my thing is I'm also very keen to share with people how simple solutions are. And there are two reasons for that. One is I see far too often brand owners hiding behind complexity or perceived complexity around their products that just literally kicks the can down the road and leads to inaction. And the second is how in so many instances, actually, a lot of our solutions are really easy if we just choose to be mindful of what it is we're trying to achieve. So on that note, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to contribute as I can based on our experiences. And again, just to be mindful that solutions for Africa and certain parts of the world will have to be different. And I really challenge those in developed worlds to, you know, to look to do more than perhaps we might be called upon, because like I said, sustainability also is a factor of affordability. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you, Chandru, for coming in. And I just want to reiterate something you said earlier about, you know, shoes, you know, or a product in general not being shiny, right? And then they just go in. Well, I'm a footwear designer and developer still, and part of my aesthetic is to make things look worn and with burnishing effects and things like that. There was just a shoe that sold out. I don't know how many pairs they ordered from Balenciaga called the Paris High Top, and they were torn and ripped and grungified and all this kind of stuff. And against their, you know, more prettier shoes, they sold out within the first day. So training the consumer to understand fashion versus trend, and then, you know, what the aesthetic is. And we did see a video earlier about sustainability, and Dr. Edwards was like, you know, sometimes it has to deal with aesthetics, and the consumer is not aware, right? Someone would not want to, most people may not want to wear a dirty shoe, And then there's some people that will spend $1,800 on one. So that all has to, you know, we kind of have to take the time, like Andy's saying, the research, and kind of just like figure out how to rein some of these things in so that those simple solutions could go on. So today we're obviously going to be talking about system change as well. Chandra brought up the EPR and policy making and that kind of thing. So these system change actions, they go beyond incentivized products, you know, like buybacks and those kind of things. So just real quick before we go into the fire round segment, we did throw a question up. I'm just going to read some of them about what people do with their shoes. And I like this one from Nicholas. He's like, here in Italy, either you discard them in a bin or you give them to someone, right? But anyway, he's a sneakerhead and he doesn't discard them since all of his shoes are part of his collection. And I brought that same idea up to another sneaker official. And I said, hey, you know, is sneaker collecting sort of sustainable, you know? And his response was absolutely not, because when you are done with that collection, or if you know, what if you can't, you know, if someone has to move around, or, you know, if they're no longer able to keep those sneakers, or it gets passed down to someone else and they, you know, they're not going to do anything with it. And it takes a time to move it, and resale industry today is not what people think it is, kind of thing. Maybe think it's sustainable to hold on to your stuff, but it kind of, you know, counters that in the long run. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, donating the wearables and collect the broken, and that answer right there, collect the broken, then it gets a question, then what do we do with the broken? So that's what I'd like to use this segment for, like the brainstorming, like what are the different ways that, you know, shoes can be reused, and which industries would benefit from its components. And right here on the side, I did have some things thrown up. I just want to stop this one real quick. This is a design from an artist, right? Her name is Barbara Leone. And she basically takes, you know, discarded shoes or a pair of shoes, two different types, maybe up to 3 different types of shoes, and she deconstructs them and reconstructs into a new pair. So that aesthetic may not work for everyone, but it is an interesting concept to think about, right? What maybe what are the next industries that spring up from infrastructure for waste management? Is it now, you know, just the throwing away? Is it the grinding? It's the this, the that. But what are some creative opportunities that you know, creatives can have to kind of keep their momentum going? This was one of them. And I also wanted you guys to kind of see, if you're not familiar with the way shoes are, you know, broken down. I think for shoe waste here, what we did was we used this Nike Exploded concept where they had their different pieces kind of picked out. And if you can see here, the green marks we're thinking, oh, that can go to a textile industry. The purple is for rubber or plastics industries, and the orangey yellow is for other, right? But if you can see how large up to the minuscule micro pieces there are in some of these designs, right? It's a little bit challenging to be able to say, oh, okay, I know that, you know, this industry is going to take this and this industry is going to take that, but who would take these little teeny tiny pieces? You know, like there's lots of conversation and, again, research to think about where they would go. And I'm waiting for you guys to answer, but I did want the audience and you guys to kind of see how shoes are broken down. And this is a pattern piece from a Brogue or some sort of derby shoes. And you can see the different pattern pieces here. Obviously this could be leather. And so it'd be a little bit more easier to say, okay, with leather, you can do this or that. But I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts. What would be the different ways that these things could be reused And in which industries do you think would benefit from them?
Okay, so like I just would like to share with you guys some little my screen. Just let me know when you see it. I just want to make sure, because I think it does help to kind of bring a little bit back the conversation to just to start on my point. Are you guys able to see my screen now?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to just go, like just to tackle your question, Tanita. I would like us to go a little bit back, because I think that recycling is an important part of the conversation, but I think it is the last point of the conversation. So I would like to take us back a little bit more into the process. When we talk about circularity, we talk about different kinds of strategies that allow us to reduce the impact of extraction of new materials, and also reduce the output of waste. So with recycling, we are tackling the part of reducing like tackling the landfill aspect, but we are not necessarily tackling the reducing the amount of products produced, right? We really need to look at that, was like Chandru mentioned, the designing component part. So when you ask us to think about this, I was thinking, okay, like what about like thinking of the options before we arrive to the recycling component? So if we are kind of like in this particular part, where we see like we're saying that for the fashion industry, there's like and the textile, which I think could also apply for the food industry, shoes industry, where we have the redesign, we have the reduce and resource recovery, the rental, the resale, the repair, the remanufacture, the repurpose, and recycle. And these are strategies that are not also only circular strategies, but business strategies. So I think that from a business point of view, because I think there are two considerations, the producer point of view and the consumer's point of view. But from the producer point of view, I think that we can look at it like from that perspective. And this is important in circularity. As we know, like the hierarchy is important. So it is important to think about what strategies can I develop first to be able to move forward. So some of the examples, sorry, I'm just gonna I think that the first thing that we need to think is really, it's really like kind of as a business to think of the strategies of what can we do. Do I need to produce another kind of shoe? And I think that what you were mentioning, Tanita, is just like this concept of redesigning, like maybe changing the way. And I think Andy also was talking about the different components of how to recreate monomaterials or elements on that level. To go to like really modular designs in which it can be produced in a different ways, and this it goes to big brands like Adidas, but this is also like a small artisan like creating these kind of products also that are kind of like more on a modular level, so that allows that element as well. Or even moving to that from that area, we could also look at materials such as biomaterials. In this case, this is 100% hemp made, that could be really reused on its own once it is recycled. Or even look at the option that I think that has not been considered much here, but that I think is very interesting, is the rental. They say that the best product, the most sustainable product, is the one that has not been created, right? So if we had already these products there, how can we monetize them somehow, right? And I think that like companies who really need to start thinking about the business model that are based more on the servitization of, rather than in the creation of products as well, so that we need to incorporate that more into our element. And then I saw also in the chat Michael mentioning maybe repair and that as an option as well. I think that's an interesting element as well, or resale of our shoes. So I kind of just wanted to make the conversation around that, those other options that we can have before getting into the recycling phase. So that would be my contribution for now.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think there are some other comments that I remember seeing in the chat. There's There's a comment that says, I see many opportunities for workforce development and green careers for the artists and sneakerheads, right? Like when Andy mentioned, consumers would now be seen as our partners, right? Like this is the type of, action that we could improvise or encourage, right, with consumers that are already in this thing. I mean, there have been like an explosion of these decon sneakerheads out there that maybe have some ideas on how to deconstruct and, and deal with these sneakers that are ending up in the landfill, specifically because I believe it was FDRA that put out a poll. It was over like almost 53%, probably today is more like 60% of the people are preferring to buy sneakers today, right? As opposed to buying high heels or flip-flops or sandals or something like that. Let me throw, does anyone else have any interjections on this question?
I'll share a bit too, just from the brand perspective.
Okay, I'll just wait. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think a lot of this also, from a pragmatic standpoint, depends on product type. So if you're using leather shoes or you have high-end footwear, a repair is a really good thing to do. And brands do a really good job of trying to encourage their consumers to get the repair done. So there are repair places globally. I know there's in the Netherlands, there's a repair shop. So obviously not just cobblers locally, but like large manufacturing facilities have take-back programs where they will take an UGG boot and completely refurbish it and send it back to the consumer. It's still very expensive because of the shipping and because of the labor involved in doing that, especially as a one-off instead of a mass-produced assembly line that may do multiple pairs and you have economy of scale of costs. So there is that's being done, but I mean, a repair for a UGG could be $70, which is quite expensive. For some people, they might just buy a new pair of shoes. So for some of that, it works. I think the real challenge in looking at a lot of this stuff is that most Americans, just like most people around the world, buy affordable footwear that's $25 to $50. It's made to last for 4 or 5 months, and then it breaks down. And there's not much that you can do with a canvas sneaker in terms of repair, depending on the quality of it. Maybe you can do a reuse program where you take it back and clean it up, but still, for Allbirds is doing that, for example, right? So I actually bought a pair of shoes that were repurposed and reused, and I saved about $20 from a brand new pair, and they looked and functioned and actually, they were great. So that was really cool to see that. But still, the price point at $20 savings off a new pair, some consumers may say, well, I'll just buy the new pair because I don't want to wear somebody else's shoes. There's still maybe that mentality. So I think, for a reuse program, we really need to focus on the efficiencies and the capacity to do that at a low cost so that when we recirculate the shoe, it's at a price point where more people will choose the reuse than the new shoe.
Right, exactly. And that's another industry that could grow. But like you're saying, maybe not many people want to wear a used shoe, but it is an industry that was dying, right? Like the cobblers, the shoe repairs, right? There's like one shoe repair here in my town, and then not another for, I don't know, I think downtown there's another one in LA. So you had to go about another 20 or so minutes out. But that's also part of it. It's not just the components of the shoes, but also what industries could spring up from this. I think there's something in here that had asked about, for example, with EPR, does it create new jobs and does it do social uplift? Like that's from Michael Simpson. Like, if we go into legislation, will that also offset another growth, right? So I think we have a lot of thought process. And Gautam, you had something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say something that came up through our filters, by way of a project that we are working on for an international American company, Levi's. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that some of these old components that are derived from old shoes can be converted into a CSR project, right? So you can think of these as small giveaways, which are very low dollar value from a company investment point of view, maybe about $1, $2, $3 max. So this is something that they promote sustainability with. So the product that I want to show you is a key fob. It's something as simple as this, a key fob that can be made out of using old parts that are derived from shoes, So the case in point here that I'm trying to show you is made out of old seat belts that were rescued from old salvage yards in and around Delhi NCR, which is where we are based. So that's all that I'd like to say is that, there is a second life possible for shoe components. There will be some cleaning involved because, obviously, shoes are worn and, they, help face a brunt of the, elements. So they're really dirty. They need to be cleaned properly for them to be converted into, a second life product, an upcycle product. But I think there is a potential here that can be tapped into, some of the bigger panels, let's say the panels just beyond the shoelaces and the, the front areas, those can lend themselves very nicely to becoming, these kind of CSR, projects that kind of accelerate in their own small way, some, like climate change aspect or, responsible consumption aspect, SDG number 12, SDG number 13. And obviously, these are creating jobs as we go along. Not everybody, this is not a white collar job, right? So this would create more blue collar jobs. And given, the complexity of India and the poverty, I think that would be a really interesting thing to tap into for the future. So just that, Tanita.
Yes. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Did you ask the question? I
said it's just that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you ended it.
Yeah, it's back to
Yeah, no, you're right. Like, it's just that you can create these what did Chandra say, some of these simple concepts, right? These simple ideas or simple small solutions, which I still think are micro solutions, right? Like there's a big solution, but that's the elephant in the room that we kind of don't want to address because we do have mortgages that we have to pay, and we have to, pay for food, and we have to pay for the clothing, and we have to pay for the school tuition. And so those things don't get addressed. But yes, it is just coming up with these alternative actions that can be done with the components of the shoes. And really quick before I go on, I know it's the video, but I have like a little, okay, this is really large work boot here, right? And, I think Andy had put in chat some the challenges that they have, but there's foam inside this collar, right? This is a canvas, which is great. So that can be reused for something. These are metal eyelets. Maybe that can go into, some be melted down possibly. I know it might be even more of a challenge with the epoxy, the coloring. The eyelets on here, that's another place where they cannot be reused, but they have to be broken down and maybe used in a different way, maybe melted. These laces that are nylon, right? So it's not an organic material. What can that be used for? We have big pieces, like you were saying, like the larger pieces of, this is suede. Thankfully, this is a suede and canvas upper, but the lining is synthetic, right? And there's the outsole that needs to be addressed. So Andy is right with the complexity of shoes. It's just, there's a lot, but as Chandra is saying, maybe there's, just cut through the fat, and there's maybe there are some quick, smaller, simplistic solutions that we can come up with. And again, this session is all about collaboration. So it would be great to see these things come to fruition. So this takes me to my next question, right? Is the future, right? So the future is not really the future. Future is right now. We're living in it. Any moment that goes by is the moments that we're not being able to be as active as we'd like. So what does that look like? You know, like what does the fashion industry need to do to establish a healthy waste management system? And I've got these little sides in here, but this is one of them, right? Like, what does our future look like? Are we only supposed to wear, you know, fashion in the gaming world? Like, are we only supposed to wear our clothes in the metaverse, right? Andy had brought up a concept too that I advocate for as much as I can, but it's, you know, it's still something that we need to re-establish here in the United States. And that's the development of hyper-local and domestic manufacturing to kind of help combat some of those things. And here's the brand that Cola was mentioning. Hold on, let me go back here. I don't know if I'm saying this right, Bukola, you can correct me if you know the correct pronunciation. Buzigahil? Buzigahil? I'm not really sure if I'm saying that correctly, but their concept is, like she's saying, okay, in Uganda, there's a huge, I don't want to say dump, but yes, dump of used clothing, right? That they need to do something with. Right. And I don't know if anyone raised their hand and was like, yeah, I'll take all of that. But in this case, this designer group, they are putting the mosh mix of these materials together and clothing together. And the name of the collection is called Return to Sender. Right. So it's like, I didn't ask for this. You gave it to me. I'm sending it back to you. And yeah, maybe I'm going to charge you, you know, X amount of dollars for it, because I mean, anyway, if I sell it for 2 cents, 5 cents, like what kind of living am I making here? So I'm going to send this back to you. And in each of the articles of clothing that you purchase, it should tell you where it came from. So maybe in a nutshell, right? So, in this case, there's like I don't know if you can see that, but some of these items are coming from South Korea, right? And so for them, all of these clothes are coming from the global north. So they're trying to pinpoint where the source comes from. And the source in this case is South Korea, the different kinds of materials, as they even tell you how to care for it, right? And it's like, oh, okay, you think it's fashion and it's trendy to have, you know, the Hobbit on one side and the Avengers t-shirt on the other. I mean, it's cool for me because, you know, I like those kinds of weirdy movies. But the point is, I'm sending it back to you, right? So is our future now going to be, we are reciprocating, right? We're going to get the reciprocal of what we put out. And then we have, I know Andy's probably familiar with this too, maybe some of us that wear these shoes, but Rothy's has this 2030 promise where they intend to make their products, you know, within that full circular system, sort of like what Liz was talking about, where even the threads that they're using and then the fibers that they're using, all of these things that they feel will help elevate their brand, reach the goal that they need for 2030 to sustain as a company, right? Like the companies need to sustain their legacies, their products, their everything. And so they're looking towards trying to make things more comfortable, durable, washable, all those buzzwords that will help the consumer say, hey, okay, let's go over here because Rothy's is doing this great thing, or, oh, let's go over here because Adidas is doing this great thing. But we're still not getting down to, you know, the meat and potatoes of what to do. So if any of you would like to chime in on what does the future look like, I would love to hear.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think you pronounced the brand correctly. I really like Puzaga Hill, what they're doing. And you mentioned earlier about deconstruction and you showed the components of what a shoe is actually made of. I feel like the future, especially for shoes, for the foot industry, would be the deconstruction side of things. And just based on the premise that I did introduce Africa as the waste ground, if an industry, a deconstruction industry could be developed an infrastructure of sorting waste can be developed on the continent, then I think that would do a lot. If businesses like this brand, Boziga Hill, do come out of Africa, because they'll be sorting the waste, deconstructing, and then recreating new products for the Western market. So to me, that's like a circular system. And I think the investment, and for me, goal number 17, partnership for the goal, should really be looking at those type of things to kind of achieve the sustainable development goals. That I kind of went through everything earlier to say, yeah, we're ticking off the boxes if we, and the 17 partnerships for this kind of deconstruction industry to be built would be really a solution.
I would agree with that, because I think the problem is the mass production of footwear. I mean, really a lot of the circularity depends on where your production is. And I think in Africa, it's a huge opportunity to set up production because of the population, because you have materials that are there. It's just simply someone coming and setting up investment. But if the products are there, you need a lot of hands for footwear. We've got this idea where you can grind a shoe down and you just throw it in and you can grind it all out. But the problem is the material makeup of footwear is completely different from brand to brand. As you know, Tanita was showing, I mean, you've got these multiple materials that are combined and stitched together or adhesive together, and you need someone that can sit there and literally take it apart. It's not an easy thing. And I think the problem is around this is that more than policy, I mean, I know there was this policy discussion where we need to implement policy and make the producers responsible. But the problem with policy, having worked 10 years on Capitol Hill, is this. First, you got to wait years for the policy to get enacted. Then you got to wait more years for the implementation. And packaging is very easy compared to footwear. So is bottles. But the producers are still having problems getting that back from the consumer. Coke and Pepsi and all these guys spend millions and millions of dollars trying to convince consumers not to throw away a Coke bottle. So I think more than the policy prescription, which is quite easy to go to a government and say, we need to do this, and then we need green funding at 0% or low percent that can actually go and invest and build local manufacturing and build factories in Africa that will make a green contribution, right, to this circular economy. That's for me, the biggest thing is investment. And the brands can be forced, but they're going to put money, they're going to add cost. And the consumer's going to pay for that, and maybe they should. But ultimately, we have a lot of wealthy people in this world who can contribute money to green causes. And I think we need a green fund for footwear that would look at what the problem is and help build the capacity by funding it. And if we could do that and generate that, I think that would make a huge impact in how we do it. Because if the funding isn't there, it's going to be difficult.
All right, I definitely agree with you on that, and I think that the costs, and I believe your organization threw up that question, and the result was not many people want to pay more for what you call a sustainable product, and not many companies want to add more costs for the infrastructure of waste management, and so that makes it seem very kind of bleak, and I think we did touch on policy, but those things kind of come hand to hand, sort of like what your organization does. And I know Chandra is really big on EPR, and that kind of resonated with me a lot here, because you kind of need the policy to go through, even if it takes, I think he was working on his for 20 years. So it takes time, but once it hits, then people start like, oh my gosh, now I have to do something. I'm scrambling. And in this case, you can't wait for the legislation to go through, right? Because I'm going to be like the person that's like EPR for footwear for sure. Because if you don't have that, then they don't see the urgency, right? Like the brands won't see the urgency to kind of deal with what they need to in a proper manner. So I think that the future is still being developed, right? Is that kind of this kind of thing? It's still being developed. There are still new products being pushed out today. There's still no answer, kind of, long-term answer, or like it's not, maybe it's not linear 100%, but it's still linear, and it's kind of like going like that. But there's no.
We also shouldn't discount the future generations coming in. Somebody said the other day, like the new like I don't know, it was Gen Z or whatever it is now, but someone was saying the new generation, we should call them Gen C for carbon. They're going to be so concerned about the planet. So the Gen C could completely change everything and say, I'm not going to buy anything that isn't circular. Like
Right.
nothing.
Right.
So
right.
I think that's the other thing too, is like we don't know what consumers are transforming rapidly, and especially younger generations. And it could be that they're like, they are the zero waste generation that is like, I won't buy anything that isn't recycled, which would be really exciting.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, and they also might be, trapped in the metaverse as well, and say, instead of wearing them outside, I'm just going to wear them as an NFT, on the video game, which is what we're seeing right now. So I do want to keep the time, and I actually want to get Chandru and Gautam out here to answer this next round. Sorry. So we are very clear, right, that there's this 2030 and there's an urgency for collaboration, right? Whether your consumers are your partners, whether it's these organizations getting together and kind of understanding what they need to do from the first, at the very top of it, whether it's, design, infrastructure, all of that, we need collaboration in order to make it happen. We've got, almost 7.5 years, to say we've done something. And I don't mean just me individually or you individually, just the industry on a whole, not just, per brand. It needs to be the whole gambit, that we understand what to do, so that the Generation C can say, oh, okay, now I know what to do. It's like having, the children, and the children look to you to say, okay, what do we do? Instead of them trying to figure it out on their own, because right now they're sneakerheads because their parents were sneakerheads, right? Or they love shoes and all this kind of stuff, or clothing or anything. So our collaboration is very urgent. And I think it calls for us to, in the grand scheme of things, like, how are we making 2030 possible? Is it possible? So Chandru and Gautam, can you guys, one at a time, of course, kind of like give your input in here as to the collaborative efforts and what that's going to mean for us. Maybe Gautam, you can answer.
Absolutely. So, I personally feel that the call for action by all countries, poor, rich, and middle income, to promote prosperity while protecting the planet, the SDGs, is a very noble idea. But, like you mentioned, the horizon, the 7.5-year horizon, to me, honestly, feels that we really need to leave the old systems and, just go ahead and start collaborating, on the double, to kind of, accelerate the speed of this, new strategies coming up, to build economic growth, address a range of social needs, including education, health, social protection, job opportunities, while tackling climate change and environmental protection. One thing that is obvious to all of us, when we kind of sign up for something like a global movement, of change makers from around the world, like the Catalyst ecosystem, is that we all understand that of the 17, goal number 13 calls for urgent action to combat climate change and all its impacts. But of all the goals that influence climate change, there is a, interdependency, right? So you can't really say that, you're looking at a goal in isolation. It doesn't ever work out like that. So we will make little progress on climate change, without accelerating, let's say, goal 7 on affordable and clean energy, for instance, or goal number 12, responsible consumption and production, which is where organizations such as Jaggery, Meaningful Design Foundation, Banco Janko, Conserve India, and a whole bunch of other organizations that are working in the regenerative design space, if they don't work together. Climate solutions can support the goals such as, just a transition to renewable energy centered on providing decent work, creating new jobs, the focus of, which is the focus of goal 8, or even through building resilient infrastructure, which is essentially the goal of the mandate of goal 9. So, with this, I think there really needs to be an element of a pledge that we all take, that there is a measure, there is an element of seriousness. We've been discussing and deliberating in panels around the world for, during and before COVID, and, it really doesn't lead to much action. These are theoretical models that we keep constructing and discussing with each other, sharing with each other. But up until the time, that there is a serious buy-in from government, from policymakers, I don't think we'll be able to do much. Whatever we do is good, is really important to achieve a critical mass. But action can only happen if there's support from the local government. And, I'll say this from a concrete example. I'll share some interesting things about how in India, there is a special economic zone dedicated for technical corporate companies, that cater to call centers or development centers or offshore centers. This has been happening for the last 20 odd years. There's a special economic zone right in the heart of the city, CBD, Central Business District, where, you suddenly have a bunch of tech companies come up, and, they obviously provide a source of income, livelihood, they help in creating a higher, sense of income generation. But, what if we now apply the same logic to sustainability? There was a new fund that was launched recently, I think, that also claimed that sustainability is the new computer science, So this was, I think, the Stanford Social Innovation Center. Don't quote me to it, but I put it in the chat box later. But $1 billion dedicated to converting sustainability into the new computer science, discipline. So I think what really needs to be done is that in every country around the world, we've tried the technology model. Now we really need to try the sustainability model. So sustainable, zones based on sustainable manufacturers, sustainable companies, sustainable organizations should come up. There should be a sustainable development center in LA. There should be one in Chicago, New York, all the big cities around the world, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai. And up until the time that we don't get that, till, policies are sort of created that favor us, we are not going to be able to do that, And so this is a very tough problem, because you might have also heard about the challenges that Indian informal economy players face, at the hands of the central government. The policies aren't very favorable. There's a big problem when it comes to taking foreign investment for organizations such as ours. The certifications and the compliances will make you lose all your hair on the head. And as you can see, that is the case with me, like compliances with FCRA, foreign direct investment into a company, they're making it really tough for people to take the next step. So also, one has to bear in mind that, funding organizations that are invested in sustainability, that are genuinely accelerating the SDGs, needs to, that needs to become much more comfortable for players around the world. So
I agree with you, Fatima. I think that is really, really interesting. Even myself, just tapping in very lightly on legislation, in particular with the EPR, and hearing kind of enthusiasm of wanting to move forward, but there are other things that are still taking precedence over that kind of concept, which would lead to green funding, which would lead to development of infrastructure in these zones, and maybe ease up some of the restrictions. But there, you know, we're just kind of scratching the surface a little bit. But I think that either way, we cannot kind of wait, you know, like everybody has to figure out amongst, like we're doing once these collaborative efforts, like we still need to move forward. And when, you know, when government catches up, we would be ready, right? Instead of doing the wait game. So it is not easy to do, and it is a very difficult conversation to have, even still. Maybe it'll take another 10, 20, 30 years before it becomes more of a relaxed conversation, because at the end of the day, no one wants to pay for garbage, right? No one wants to get back the garbage, right? We're still having issues about trying to figure out what to do with your home-based garbage, you know, your waste from your kitchen, right? So there's something being in play for that. But if you live in a municipality, like in the cities, you know, your waste, your home garbage waste is going into the garbage and into the dumpster. There is no thought process right now embedded in the minds about what to do with that. So I definitely think that we still have work to do, but with so many of our organizations here, that there is some things that we could do collaboratively just to kind of keep the ball rolling. And I don't know if Chandru is out or if he is available.
I am indeed. Thank you.
Oh,
I've been
okay.
listening
He is
very
indeed.
keenly.
Okay, yeah. Would you lend your ear? We've got a couple more minutes here, and I just wanted to hear your response to the urgency of collaboration and achieving these goals and what that looks like.
Absolutely. So, you know, just in terms of some of the comments made earlier, we do work with the Coca-Colas and Pepsis of the world. And I do acknowledge that they spend millions of dollars trying to convince consumers to bring goods back. But we must know that that, in the bigger scheme of things, is nothing. You know, the playbook for many times for corporates is to deflect our attention. The reality is that if we want meaningful action on a time scale to which we're all talking to, it has to be government intervention. There's no other way to do it. If it means products become more expensive, guess what? You know, we sell fewer of them. And if environment truly is the goal and sustainability is truly goal, that's the new reality we have to live with. We must know that companies like Adidas and Nike will never, ever move to the point where they take responsibility for their products at end of life unless there's legislation for it. The good news is, even in America now, EPR has been launched, I believe, in a few states. I speak under correction. I think Oregon, Ohio, California are very proactive on this now. They want to actually remove the recycling symbol from many products because it's just confusing far too many people. So I think fundamentally, we've got to call on brand owners to design their products to be circular. And to the earlier point that, yeah, there are secondary markets and shoes could become other products. Let's be mindful that those other products also have an end of life. If we can't design shoes to become shoes again, we just keep on depleting resources at a rate that we can't replenish it at the end of the day. So for me, in terms of what we've seen versus what anyone can theorize about, it has to be legislated. It has to be mandatory. And I think that's the only way we'll meet the timelines. I think Bill Gates, whatever your views are on him, probably said it succinctly, which was, you know, Generation Z, absolutely, they're very mindful on their purchasing habits to be environmentally friendly. But the reality is we are the last generation that can do anything about climate change. It's no good waiting for them. By the time they occupy positions of power and influence, the damage is already done. So my individual perspective, based on what we've lived and experienced, is we've got to push for policy change. So hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Chandra. Yes, I think that all of these plays need to happen. The policy, getting ourselves in order within the industry itself, making sure that we're set up right, so the next generation can come in and just kind of carry it forward. There really is no sense for us to think that they'll handle it, right? So they should they'll want to handle, but they're going to take the, like you're saying, by the playbook of what we create and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Maybe there'll be some improvements, some adjustments and things like that. So we just have about a couple minutes here. I have, I think we're throwing into the chat all of you guys' information so that collaborations can happen. Obviously, we are part of Catalyzing Change Week. This is the Catalyst 2030. So if anyone is interested, which I hope, to join our waste stream as we come up with some of these solutions, right, that we can kind of implement into the different industries and kind of solve some of these hardships, right, make some of these challenges less challenging. Maybe coming up with ways to speak to the consumer in another manner, right? And where they do become partners and not just consumers, because everyone on here is a consumer, right? Does not convolute that. We are all consumers. We're purchasing, we're buying, we're using, we're discarding. And so our passion, right, or our thought process about how we're going to deal with things that we're producing for these industries is very important. And I think that it is up to us to kind of work these things out. Does anyone have, I'll leave, we've got like a couple, just 2 more minutes. If you want to leave with any last thoughts, I invite you, but I also see there are lots of questions in the chat. So some of it's directed to the guests specifically. Chandra, if you're capable, if you have the capabilities of going in there, the information on the legislation in South Africa in regards to EPR, I think that was a question in there. There was also something really interesting about meeting with certain countries in Africa that are receiving the end-of-life textile and what to do. But if you can take a moment to look through the chat and kind of answer some of those questions, that would be great. If not, I think we're good on time. I just want to thank everybody for sitting in and just going over, having these thoughts of achieving these SDGs. I mean, there are 17 of them. We can all relate to at least all 17, right, within this industry, and even the sprouting of new things within the industry. So again, I just appreciate you guys for coming in and sharing your thoughts on how we can, tackle something like shoe waste, which is a big challenge, but in the fashion industry in general, we do have, a long road ahead of us, but I think we can get that road shortened out. Again, thank you very much. And anything that, if anyone wants to join our group again, just email Tanita@lastreport.com. You can put your information in the chat as well. The transcript will be printed and the recording sent out so that you guys can share with your network and create more extensions of this. Please enjoy the rest of your mornings, afternoons, and evenings. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being part of this session, and you guys have a fantastic day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're very
Good
welcome.
meeting everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a lovely one.